how is the war playing out in Iran? The U.S.-Israeli assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other senior security figures has left a power vacuum. How challenging will it be to rebuild its leadership structure? And in light of the recent anti-government protests, could Iran descend into chaos? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Iran stands at a crossroads. With its top leadership assassinated early in the joint U.S.-Israeli offensive, the remaining layers of power have been trying to maintain control. There are concerns that after January's mass anti-government demonstrations, this war, with two of its biggest enemies, would lead to chaos. U.S. President Donald Trump has made clear his desire for regime change in Iran. He's even urged Iranians to seize the moment and take control of their country. Many argue that what remains of Iranian leadership is struggling for survival. But Iran's leadership is notably complex. It has parallel armies, multiple intelligence services, and several command structures. So, will it survive? Or is the situation spiraling out of control? We'll talk to our guests in just a moment, but first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Iranians are mourning their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, assassinated in an airstrike on Saturday. It was the beginning of a joint offensive by the US and Israel, which has seen daily attacks on the capital, Tehran, and 150 other towns and cities. Homes, schools, hospitals and police stations have been hit. State media report more than 1,000 people have been killed. And the International Atomic Energy Agency has confirmed damage to the entrance of the Natanz nuclear plant. In the holy city of Qom, the Assembly of Experts is preparing to choose a new supreme leader. But the building where those deliberations are usually held was attacked on Tuesday. And Israel's defense minister says whoever is chosen will also be a target for elimination. Since June, joint Israeli-US attacks have killed many senior figures in the Revolutionary Guard, along with other security officials and government figures. The Trump administration has provided various narratives for its objectives in striking Iran, including removing the current governing bodies from power.
Turns out the regime who chanted death to America and death to Israel was gifted death from America and death from Israel. This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it.
Iran has responded with its own wave of attacks, launching drones and missiles at Israel and US assets in the region. Airports, seaports, hotels, civilian buildings and energy facilities have also been hit. And the foreign minister says the assault will continue.
They have advanced military technology and a large number of armed forces on land, sea and air. Everyone has seen what kind of campaign they have launched against us, and we have stood strong.
The impact has far-reaching consequences beyond the Gulf region. Oil and gas prices are soaring, markets are rattled, and neither side is showing any sign of standing down. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. Joining us on set is Sasan Karimi, a former deputy to Iran's vice president for strategic affairs. In Beirut is Maha Yahya, director of the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center. And in Florida is Christopher Hill, a former U.S. diplomat and ambassador to Iraq. Thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Sasan, let me start with you today. Iran is still attempting to fill in this power vacuum that's been caused by the Israeli and U.S. attacks. Let me ask you, how challenging is it going to be for Iran to rebuild its power structure?
Thank you for having me first. It is not that much vague because Iran has very fully polished and well-polished constitutional law that predicts all the mechanisms for different situations to build up any vacuum and fill out any vacuum, a power that may happen because not out of war, maybe because of the natural process, people can die, can pass away. So it should be predicted, and it is. So from my point of view, there is no vacuum that much. As you can see, there are days that the country has no supreme leader as an individual, but a council consisting of 3 is controlling the country. Even in the situation of war with a couple of nuclear entities, United States as a country and the Israeli regime, with full force, the country is in a battlefield, and there is no really vacuum in the power, and no escape, no scare, and nothing, and not even lack of the commanding the war. So also, as Mr. Larijani is sitting on the chair of Secretary of the National Security Council, it is very well being moderated during the war. And also on the shops, every good is available, everything is sorted out by the government of Dr. Pezeshkian. So very, very rarely in such a country, country after 20 years of sanctions, you can see such a sorted out situation during a war.
Okay, Sasan, so you're saying there are protocols, there are procedures that are in place, but obviously this is still a very tenuous moment. And I want to ask you about right now what the concerns are when it comes to how the war is playing out in Iran, especially in light of the recent anti-government protests. I mean, is there concern there amongst the government, amongst the population, that all of this could descend into chaos?
No. Because if there is no intervention, that we heard from CNN that CIA is arming the Kurdish group to enter to Iran as some militias, regardless of that, because of the unification and the unity inside Iran, out of a culture, not by law, during the crisis moment like this, regardless of the protests on the streets a couple of months ago, less than a couple of months ago, we didn't see any chaotic version of Iran in these days. Even the same people that are not agree with each other, they are cooperating when something is getting happen. Forget about the few people outside the country, diaspora can play another role, or the dependent populations. But inside the country, we have a kind of unity, which is very beautiful in the very sad moments of war. That when, for example, 11 hospitals are attacked in Iran, one is very close to my own home, 20 meters only away. People are cooperating in the movies. You can see the very beautiful cooperation and unity. So that is the way during the Iran-Iraq war, which lasted for 8 years, with the whole world behind Saddam Hussein, Iranians could resist.
Maha, let me turn to you now. The Trump administration seems to be making the case or the argument that they believe that this conflict and perhaps an internal uprising in Iran could put an end to the current regime there. I want to ask you, from your vantage point, is that a credible argument? Is that a believable narrative?
Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for having me. No, it's not. At least at this moment, it's not a very credible argument, partly because there is no organized opposition that is able to take charge of the country. Iran is a country of 90 million people, multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian, and as your guest described, one with multiple centers of power across different institutions and organizations. So, and at this moment, the only, I would say, declared opposition, not necessarily credible, but declared opposition, is the son of the former Shah, Pahlavi, who is based outside and has very little connections to the country. Internally, we haven't seen an organized opposition. And this idea that somehow a Kurdish uprising would be able to lead the charge, I think, is complete miscalculation, because this is only likely to lead, if this were to happen, if some Kurdish separatist groups were to take the bait, as they say, this will only lead to internal strife and possibly greater chaos. What we're hearing is not just about the potential arming by the CIA of separatist groups, but also we've seen a very concerted attack by the US and the Israeli armed forces, the airplanes, of security checkpoints, of police stations in that entire region. So they're going directly after the state security apparatus, which means it will become also a very chaotic environment down the road. Even if the bombs were to stop tomorrow, the situation within Iran is going to remain quite tenuous. But I don't see a kind of credible opposition, at least at this moment, rising up to take the reins, so to speak, unless there is an arrangement with someone from within the system. And I think in a post-conflict Iraq, we're likely to see even greater repression than what we've seen so far, in part because whoever is going to take over will have very limited fiscal space, for example, to address the needs of a population that was already very discontent with inflation, the lack of jobs, everything that had been going on.
Ambassador Hill, I think it's safe to say there's been a lot of mixed messaging when it comes to U.S. officials and the rationale for getting into this war. You've had some suggesting that it was because they knew that Israel was going to strike first, and others saying, no, in fact, the U.S. was, the entity that tipped the hand of Israel. Questions as to if this is about regime change or if there was an imminent threat. When we hear so many different versions of what the rationale is for this war, what does that do to the credibility of the U.S. in this region?
Well, I think that's certainly a fair point. I mean, there has been this kind of shifting around of what the purpose of this was, and the term regime change, which is usually associated with failure, policy failure. They seem to have throttled that back a little. You don't hear a lot of regime change. But I think a couple of points need to be made. First of all, there's absolutely no support, no sympathy whatsoever in this country for the rule of Ayatollah Khomeini. I mean, the idea of what Iran has come to represent, has come to symbolize over the last 38 years is something extremely negative in terms of its position in the world. It's got some friends, it's got some partners, but it's very unclear that those partners can do anything to help Iran in this situation. I think, secondly, it's important to understand that the U.S. military knows what it's doing, and we've seen rather devastating effects from these airstrikes. But the question, of course, is, as your question suggests, is what next? I think the U.S. military will be able to look back on this and say, we have seriously degraded any offensive capability that Iran had. That is, they're not going to be able to launch attacks in the future. Their missile force will be decimated. Their naval force, which has occasionally been able to move into Hormuz and create a uncertainty about whether that can remain open, that is being devastated. I think it's pretty clear the nuclear program, although there are different disagreements as to how extensive that was in the first place, that is also being decimated. So the capacity of Iran to create problems outside of its borders has been sharply attenuated in the last 100 hours. And I might add, this is not going to end today. I mean, this is going to continue. But the real question then is what is going to come next? I must say, the U.S. has not been present in Iran for since 1980, since our embassy was frankly taken hostage, where our diplomats were subjected to these, being blindfolded for weeks on end and threatened with mock executions, et cetera. We have not had any diplomatic relations or diplomatic presence in that country. So I think it's fair to say that we don't know a lot about these internal issues going on in Iran. Often, as we did in Iraq, we turn to people who were from the immigrant community, and many of them had judgments about Iraq that were entirely wrong in terms of what was going on internally. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little of that today. What is clear to me is that there are a lot of guns there, a lot of differing opinions within Iran. And what worries me, of course, is as you see this attenuation of the state, whether it's police force or army, what I am concerned about, of course, is you'll have a kind of civil unrest grow and turn into a civil war. And anyone who's ever witnessed a civil war knows who pays for that. And they tend to be innocent civilians. So I think these are really difficult moments for Iran. At some point, I think the U.S. will claim success in saying that it's prevented Iran from doing any more mischief overseas. And maybe the Iranians will show, or the Iranian regime, I'm not even sure what to call it today, will want to show that it can continue to do things. But so far, all it's done is galvanized all the Gulf states against it. And now it's going to get Turkey involved against it. It's really, I think the Iranians, whatever their leadership, they're certainly not showing good judgment. So the real issue ahead is if the U.S. claims some kind of victory, what's going to become of Iran? And at that point, I think it's really going to be a question, not for the Kurds, and I completely agree, it's a misguided strategy. It's not about the Kurds. It's not about any other such element. It's going to be about within Iran and how these 90 million people are going to find be able to determine a governing structure that will calm that country down and allow Iran to realize its potential, a potential that clearly exists in its civilization, if not in its governing structures.
Maha, let me ask you, there is this argument that what remains of Iranian leadership is going to be struggling for survival. And I want to ask you about that. How complex is the Iranian leadership structure? If you could just put that into perspective for our viewers. We know that it has parallel armies, that it has multiple intelligence services, several command structures. How complicated is all of this?
It's quite complicated, but I don't think the issue is whether they're struggling for survival per se as individuals. I think the entire system, for Iran, this was very much this war presented an existential crisis. In the same way, their reaction, for example, to the protests a month and a half ago was brutal. And in part because it's a weakened regime, it's unable to address internal discontent. And therefore, it came down with an iron fist. Now we have an external war that's literally, crippling the various institutions within the state, various centers of power. Once the dust settles, it's going to be very difficult for them to address all the things that are going to emerge. Whether it's, and I agree with your guest, the issue of civil strife will be looming in a very big way, in addition to the day-to-day discontent with, the closing political space, the inability to speak, the social restrictions, et cetera, as well as inflation, the value of the Iranian rial, etc. So I think the struggle there will be how to maintain cohesion whilst and keep control over the vast territory, whilst trying to grapple with all the different governance issues that will emerge. Until now, I mean, the idea that this system is going to fade away or crumble away, I think, again, is a mistake. Until now, for example, we have not seen, and these are the things, as an observer, I'd be looking for. We haven't seen any cracks within the security sector, no leaks. Within the political elite, everyone's come together in a very strong way to defend the system. Now, once the dust of battle settles, that's a different question altogether. And I worry because what we're seeing today is an America and an Israel that have opened, they've shot the first shot. They've launched into a war of choice, frankly. This is a war of choice. There was no direct, all the security assessments we're seeing, there was no direct threat to the United States of America. So this was a war of choice that was launched and that has dragged the entire region and frankly beyond the region. We're seeing the impact, for example, of in gas prices, the whole energy supply networks in Europe, among other places. So the Europe, some countries in Europe are starting to get embroiled into this because the US and Israel went into this without any kind of coordination, even with their allies. Unlike 2003, for example, when George Bush went into Iraq, or even 1991, there was an international coalition that went through the UN. There was international support for this. In this case, there's no support, or there's very little support. People were taken, countries, allies, everyone was taken by surprise. And the escalation was very rapid, and it's brought everyone into the fray. And I think, frankly, that's also part of Iran's strategy. And we were all also surprised by the fact that they very quickly went after all countries in the Gulf, including Qatar and Oman, both of which are countries that were trying to mediate between solutions, whether it's on the Israeli front or on the Iranian front, with the US and others. So, it took many of us by surprise that they would launch these all-out attacks, not only on
Maha,
American.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to, the point that you're making, I actually want to ask Sasan about, because he's also reacting to what you're saying. Look, you heard Maha there talking about the fact that, this has spiraled to include the region at this point. And she was also talking about the Iranian attacks on neighboring countries, including Qatar, of course. We know Iran has responded with this wave of attacks the past few days. They've launched drones and missiles at Israel and U.S. assets in the region. But there's also been airports, seaports, hotels, civilian buildings, energy facilities that have been hit in these countries. The foreign minister of Iran says that these assaults will continue. From your vantage point, can Iran now get to a point where things can de-escalate? And how does that happen?
Let me, before answering to your question, review another time that we shouldn't tell story from the end. The story is that invading another country is totally abandoned by the United Nations Charter, okay? Unless you have a resolution under Chapter 7, Article number 52, which you don't have. Internally, inside the United States, you need to ratify it. At the Congress, you don't have. So it is internally and internationally unlawful to attack Iran. So Iran is not has not initiated any attack to its its neighbors. Its neighbors are the best friends of Iran, that always Iran wants to raise friendship hand to them, especially the Arab countries, especially Turkey, etc. As Maya said, Qatar and Oman and also Turkey were the ones who wanted to mediate between Iran and the United States. Who betrayed the table? Who attacked the negotiations for the second time? Who attacked the other party of the talks in the middle of talks? So this is not a trustful or a trust-building behavior. Who can talk about a further round of talks between Iran and the United States in Iran. For the third time during the talks, we should be attacked. Who is the country in the region who initiated the war? Who is the country in the region who initiated attacks against 5 countries? I count for you: Iran, Gaza, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and Qatar. Israel, who is mentioning and talking about a greater country for itself? Israel, not Iran. Iran did not initiate any attack since 200 years ago up until now.
Sasan,
and they are all only remedials.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we just don't have much time left. I want to ask you, you're talking about friendly countries and trying to establish these relationships. How do you begin to rebuild trust with these countries that have mediated in light of the fact that now not just energy infrastructure, but civilian targets have been hit in these countries by Iran?
Yeah, that's why, that's because of the fact that our civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, including 165 kids, very small primary school daughters, are already killed and attacked by the United States from these bases around us. So we attack them there as a remedial measure, not initiate any attack to our neighbors. De-escalation is possible, but Iranians are furious, but I never heard any offer that Iran should consider.
Sasan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we just have about a minute left. And Ambassador Hill, I just need to ask you, there is a lot of speculation right now as to whether or not the U.S. would attempt to put boots on the ground in Iran. You were addressing that somewhat in your answer earlier, but I want to know from your vantage point, do you think that is something that is on the table now that the Trump administration would attempt going forward?
I would be reluctant to say that there's anything not on the table, but that said, I believe it is extremely unlikely to see so-called boots on the ground. I would like to take exception to the notion that Iran was innocently sitting around and suddenly was brutally attacked by the United States and Israel. Iran has been a huge supporter of terrorism over the years. I mean, when I was in Iraq, I was attacked by a improvised explosive device, something called the Promise Day Brigade. That device came straight out of Iran. So I really have to take exception to the idea that Iran is an innocent in this. Iran has been extremely belligerent in its neighborhood and frankly to the world at large. And one hopes that when the dust finally settles and they get through this, that Iran can again take its place as a responsible state in the world, but that has not been the case for many years.
All right, well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation. And thanks so much to all of our guests, Sasan, Karimi, Maha, Yahya, and Christopher Hill. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.